Look what they dragged in here, guys. A yoga instructor with daddy issues. Jake Morrison's voice boomed across the Iron Fortress gym like a cannon shot, his massive 6 feet 5 inches frame casting a shadow over the wrestling mats. The Friday night crowd at Riverside's most notorious fight club turned to stare at the woman methodically unwrapping her hands near the equipment lockers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She looked exactly like what Morrison claimed, someone who'd wandered into the wrong building while searching for a Pilates class. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches in worn jeans and an oversized hoodie, with shoulder-length auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She seemed as out of place in this testosterone-fueled environment as a butterfly in a thunderstorm. Her movements were quiet, deliberate, almost meditative as she folded her street clothes and placed them carefully in an empty locker. The Iron Fortress wasn't your typical gym. Located in an old warehouse on the industrial side of Riverside, it catered to a specific clientele: former military, professional fighters, law enforcement officers, and anyone else who believed that true strength was measured by how much punishment you could dish out and absorb. The walls were lined with heavy bags that had seen thousands of hours of abuse, their leather surfaces scarred and patched from countless impacts. Wrestling mats covered most of the floor space, stained with the sweat and sometimes blood of men who came here to prove themselves against others, who shared their need for physical dominance. Morrison was the unofficial king of this concrete kingdom. A former Marine sergeant who'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan, he'd built his reputation by defeating every challenger who'd stepped onto these mats over the past 2 years. At 240 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, with hands like anvils and a neck thick as a tree trunk, he was the kind of man other men crossed the street to avoid confronting. His followers, a collection of wannabe tough guys and gym regulars, gathered around him like disciples around a violent prophet. "I think she's lost," called out Tommy Briggs from the bench press, his voice dripping with mock concern. Briggs was Morrison's lieutenant in this hierarchy of aggression, a stocky ex-cop whose career had ended under circumstances nobody discussed, but everyone whispered about. The yoga studio is about 10 blocks that way. "Sweetheart," he continued, pointing dramatically toward the exit with theatrical flair that earned appreciative chuckles from the assembled crowd. The woman, who'd given her name as Maya Chun when she'd signed the liability waiver at the front desk, didn't acknowledge the commentary. She continued her preparation ritual with the same methodical precision she'd shown since walking through the door 20 minutes earlier. Her gym bag was military surplus, old and worn but meticulously maintained. Everything she removed from it was placed in precise order: water bottle, towel, hand wraps, a small first aid kit that looked more comprehensive than most people would carry to a casual workout. "Maybe she's here for the self-defense class," suggested Rico Martinez, a weekend warrior who worked in IT during the week, but transformed into a wannabe fighter every Friday night. You know, the kind where they teach suburban moms how to kick attackers in the shin and run away screaming. The laughter that followed was cruel and predatory, the sound of a pack recognizing fresh prey. But Maya's expression never changed. She pulled off her hoodie to reveal a simple black athletic shirt that, for just a moment, pulled tight across her shoulders and arms. Anyone paying close attention might have noticed that her build was different from what they'd initially assumed, leaner but more defined, with the kind of muscle tone that came from functional strength rather than cosmetic bodybuilding. Morrison studied her, with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up potential prey. Something about her calm demeanor in the face of obvious hostility was bothering him, triggering instincts honed by years of combat experience. Most people, especially civilians, showed some reaction to being outnumbered and mocked in an environment like this. Fear, anger, embarrassment, something. But this woman seemed as unperturbed as if she were alone in her own living room. "You sure you're in the right place, lady?" Morrison asked, his tone shifting from mockery to something more serious. "This isn't Planet Fitness. We don't have juice bars or mirrors with motivational quotes. People get hurt here. Sometimes badly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. For the first time since entering, Maya looked up from her preparation and met his gaze directly. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they held a depth that suggested experiences far beyond what her appearance indicated. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the gym despite its quiet tone, cutting through the background noise of clanging weights and distant conversation. "I appreciate the concern," she said simply, "but I think I'm exactly where I need to be." The response was polite, but somehow final, delivered with the kind of calm certainty that made Morrison's instincts prickle even more intensely. There was something about the way she held herself, the way her eyes swept the room briefly before returning to his face, the complete absence of intimidation in her posture, despite being surrounded by 24 men who could physically overpower her without breaking a sweat. "Well then," Morrison said slowly, his voice taking on the theatrical tone he used when he wanted to put on a show for his audience, "I guess we should make you feel welcome. Boys, I think our new friend here might need a demonstration of what we do in this establishment. You know, so she can make an informed decision about whether this is really where she wants to be spending her Friday evening." The circle of men began to tighten around the wrestling area, sensing that their entertainment for the evening was about to begin. Morrison stepped onto the central mat, his movements deliberate and intimidating. At 240 pounds, he looked like a human bulldozer, all thick muscle and aggressive posture. His hands, scarred from countless fights, flexed unconsciously as he settled into a wrestler's stance. Maya finished her preparation and stood up from the bench where she'd been sitting. Without the oversized hoodie, her build was more apparent, compact but athletic, with the kind of proportions that suggested speed and flexibility rather than raw power. She looked like a college athlete, maybe a distance runner or gymnast. Certainly not someone who belonged in a place where grown men settled disputes with violence. But as she walked toward the mat with that same deliberate, unhurried pace she'd maintained since arriving, something in the air began to shift. The laughter was becoming more forced, the jokes more nervous. Even Morrison, for all his bluster, found himself studying her movement pattern with the analytical eye of someone who'd survived combat by reading body language and threat. Assessment. Maya stepped onto the wrestling mat and looked around at the circle of faces staring back at her. For just a moment, a small smile played at the corners of her mouth, not friendly, not nervous, but something else entirely. Something that made Morrison wonder, for the first time since this confrontation began, whether he might have misjudged the situation completely. "All right then," she said quietly, rolling her shoulders once in a motion that somehow managed to look both casual and predatory. "Let's see what you've got." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The atmosphere in Iron Fortress shifted like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. What had started as casual Friday night entertainment was crystallizing into something more focused and predatory. Morrison stepped to the center of the wrestling mat, his boots squeaking against the worn vinyl surface as he assumed the role of ring announcer and executioner rolled into one. Well, he announced to his growing audience, his voice carrying the theatrical boom of someone accustomed to commanding attention through intimidation. "It looks like we've got ourselves a volunteer for tonight's educational demonstration." He gestured grandly toward Maya, who stood at the edge of the mat with that same unsettling calm she'd maintained since arriving. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our mystery guest, all 90 pounds of pure determination and questionable life choices. The laughter that erupted from the assembled crowd was sharp and hungry. These were men who'd spent their week taking orders from bosses, following traffic laws, pretending to be civilized members of society. Friday nights at Iron Fortress were their release valve, their chance to embrace the violence that polite society demanded they suppress. A small woman wandering into their domain represented the perfect opportunity to assert dominance without real consequences. Maybe she's here to teach us about proper stretching techniques. Tommy Briggs called out from his position near the free weights, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. I heard yoga instructors are really good at helping with flexibility. Think she can show us some poses? The suggestion earned another round of cruel laughter, the kind that echoed off concrete walls and settled into the soul like an infection. Rico Martinez had abandoned his workout entirely to join the growing circle of spectators. Money says she taps out before Morrison even makes contact, he announced, pulling a crumpled 20 from his pocket. Hell, she might faint just from the intimidation factor. Look at her. She probably weighs less than Morrison's left leg. Maya continued her preparation. Routine as if the commentary was background noise at a coffee shop rather than a coordinated psychological assault designed to break her confidence. She tested her balance with small movements, rolled her ankles to check flexibility, and adjusted her ponytail with movements so economical and precise they seemed almost choreographed. Her breathing remained steady, her expression neutral, her posture relaxed but somehow ready. Morrison studied her with growing irritation. In his experience, civilians reacted predictably to intimidation. They either backed down immediately or tried to bluff their way through with false bravado that collapsed under pressure. Maya was doing neither. She seemed genuinely unconcerned about the situation, as if being surrounded by hostile men in a place designed for violence was just another Tuesday evening for her. You know what I think? Morrison said, addressing his audience while keeping his eyes fixed on Maya. I think our new friend here has been watching too many movies. Probably saw some Hollywood nonsense about girl power and decided she could walk into a real gym and play with the big boys. He flexed his shoulders, making his already impressive frame appear even larger. Time for a reality check. Casey Bull Henderson, a former bouncer whose nickname came from his habit of charging through problems rather than thinking around them, stepped forward from the crowd. At 6 feet 2 inches and 220 pounds of poorly maintained muscle, he looked like a human battering ram with anger management issues and a grudge against the world. Jake, maybe you should start her off easy, Henderson suggested with mock concern. You know, just pin her down for a few seconds. Let her tap out with some dignity intact. No need to embarrass the poor thing completely. His grin revealed teeth that had seen better decades and several violent encounters. Although, if she wants to make it interesting, I'd be happy to take the second round. The suggestion drew appreciative hoots from the crowd. Several other men began volunteering for subsequent training sessions, each one more crude than the last. Maya listened to the escalating commentary without visible reaction, her attention seemingly focused on internal preparations that had nothing to do with the psychological warfare being waged around her, but those with military experience might have recognized what she was actually doing. The controlled breathing, the subtle weight shifts, the way her eyes tracked movement patterns while her expression remained neutral. These weren't the actions of someone preparing to be victimized. They were the behaviors of a predator conducting final pre-engagement assessments. Morrison moved closer, deliberately invading her personal space in a way designed to trigger fight or flight responses. Most people would have stepped back, started talking nervously, or shown some sign of intimidation. Maya simply looked up at him with those dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Last chance to walk away, sweetheart, Morrison said quietly. his voice losing the theatrical boom and taking on the intimate menace he'd used in darker places during his military service. Once we start, there's no referee, no time limits, no gentle treatment, because you're a lady. This is how we settle things here, through demonstration of superior capability. Maya's response was to take a half step forward rather than back, closing the distance between them instead of increasing it. The movement was so unexpected that Morrison actually blinked in surprise. People didn't move toward him when he was using his intimidation voice. They moved away, apologized, made excuses, and left. They didn't step closer with expressions of mild interest, as if he'd just offered to show her something fascinating rather than threatened her with physical domination. "I understand the rules," Maya said calmly. Her voice carried no trace of nervousness, no hint of bravado, just simple acknowledgement of the situation. "Are we doing this, or are we going to keep talking about it?" The directness of her response caught the entire crowd off guard. This wasn't how these confrontations usually developed. There was supposed to be more fear, more pleading, more opportunity for the crowd to savor the psychological breakdown before the physical demonstration began. Maya was skipping straight to the main event with the casual attitude of someone ordering coffee. Henderson let out a low whistle. "Damn, Jake. I think she's actually serious. Maybe she's one of those crazy ones who gets off on pain or something. You might want to be careful. The crazy ones sometimes bite." Morrison felt his confidence waver for just a moment. Something about Maya's complete lack of appropriate fear responses was triggering combat instincts he'd learned to trust during his military service. But the crowd was watching, his reputation was on the line. And backing down from a woman half his size would destroy the carefully cultivated image he'd spent 2 years building. "All right then," he said, rolling his massive shoulders and dropping into a wrestler's crouch. "Don't say I didn't warn you. Boys, I want everyone to pay attention here. This is what happens when people confuse fantasy with reality." Maya stepped fully onto the mat, her bare feet finding purchase on the vinyl surface with the confidence of someone who'd spent considerable time in similar environments. She moved to the center position, not quite mirroring Morrison's aggressive stance, but settling into something that looked deceptively casual while maintaining perfect balance and spacing. "Just so we're clear on the rules," Morrison announced to his audience, his voice regaining its theatrical quality as he prepared to put on a show. "First person to submit or get pinned for 10 seconds loses. No striking, no joint breaks, just good old-fashioned wrestling." He grinned at Maya with predatory satisfaction. "Think you can handle that? Or do you need us to make it even easier?" Maya's response was a slight smile that somehow managed to look both polite and vaguely unsettling. "Those rules work fine for me," she said quietly. Then, after a pause that stretched just long enough to make Morrison wonder if he'd missed something, she added, "Should we shake hands first, or do you prefer to just begin?" The crowd erupted in fresh laughter at what they interpreted as naive politeness from someone about to be systematically humiliated. But a few of the more experienced fighters in the group noticed something different in her tone, a quality they couldn't quite identify, but that made their instincts prickle with unease. Morrison decided to end this quickly and decisively. He'd pin her in the first 30 seconds, make it look effortless, and send her on her way with a story she'd never tell anyone. What happened next would either confirm his dominance or teach everyone present a lesson about assumptions that would haunt them for years to come. "No handshakes," Morrison growled, settling into his attack position. "Let's just get this over with." Morrison lunged forward with the explosive power that had dominated countless opponents over the past 2 years. His strategy was simple and brutal. Use his 70-pound weight advantage to drive Maya to the ground, pin her shoulders to the mat, and end this embarrassing spectacle before it could develop into anything resembling a real contest. He'd executed this same takedown against men his own size, and the physics seemed laughably straightforward. Against someone who looked like she. belonged in a college library rather than a combat arena. Happened next defied every law of momentum and leverage that Morrison thought he understood. Maya didn't retreat or brace for impact as every instinct and training manual suggested she should. Instead, she moved forward to meet his charge, her body flowing like water on his attempted grab. Her left hand found his extended right wrist with surgical precision, while her right palm struck the inside of his elbow with a force that sent shock waves up his arm. The combination redirected his forward momentum in a direction he'd never intended to go. And suddenly Morrison found himself airborne in a way that his inner ear insisted was impossible. The throw happened so fast that the crowd's collective intake of breath was still beginning when Morrison's 240-pound frame crashed into the wrestling mat with a sound like a small building collapsing. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent vibrations through the concrete floor that everyone present felt in their bones. For a moment, the iron fortress fell into absolute silence except for the echo of Morrison's body hitting vinyl and the soft whisper of Maya landing gracefully on her feet exactly where she'd started. Morrison lay on his back, staring at the warehouse ceiling through a haze of confusion and oxygen deprivation. His brain was still processing the fact that he was horizontal when he'd been vertical just seconds before, while his body conducted a rapid inventory of potentially damaged parts. Everything seemed to be functional, but the speed and completeness of his reversal of fortune had left him temporarily unable to reconcile what had happened with what should have been physically possible. Maya stood over him, not in a threatening posture, but with the calm attention of someone waiting to see if further action was necessary. Her breathing remained steady, her stance relaxed, her expression carrying the same mild interest she'd shown throughout the evening. She looked like a yoga instructor who'd just demonstrated a particularly elegant pose rather than someone who'd just thrown a man nearly twice her size across a room with seemingly effortless precision. "That was impressive," she said quietly, extending her hand to help him up. "You commit fully to your attacks. Most people hold back subconsciously, but you put everything behind that charge." The comment was delivered with what sounded like genuine professional appreciation, as if Maya were a dance instructor complimenting a student's dedication to learning new choreography. But the casual way she discussed Morrison's technique while standing over his prostrate form carried implications that made the assembled crowd shift uncomfortably. Morrison accepted her hand, partially out of habit and partially because his brain was still catching up to current events. Her grip was firm and surprisingly strong, and she pulled him to his feet with an efficiency that suggested lifting 240-pound men was a routine part of her daily activities. Once vertical, Morrison found himself face to face with someone who looked exactly the same as she had 10 minutes earlier, but who had somehow transformed into something entirely different. "Lucky shot," Tommy Briggs called out from the crowd, his voice carrying forced confidence that didn't quite mask his uncertainty. Jake wasn't expecting anything from someone her size. Now that he knows what he's dealing with, it'll be different. Maya turned toward the voice with interest rather than offense, as if Briggs had made a valuable observation worth considering. "You're absolutely right," she agreed pleasantly. "The element of surprise is a significant tactical advantage. It's much less effective the second time." The acknowledgement should have been reassuring to Morrison and his followers, but something in Maya's tone suggested she was stating a fact rather than conceding a weakness. She was agreeing that surprise wouldn't work again while somehow implying that she had other options available that didn't rely on her opponent's lack of preparation. Morrison rolled his shoulders and shook his head to clear the remaining confusion from the throw. His pride was bruised more severely than his body, but his military experience had taught him to adapt quickly to changing tactical situations. If Maya had some legitimate wrestling training, he'd adjust his approach accordingly. Size and strength advantages didn't disappear just because someone knew a few techniques. "All right," Morrison said, settling back into his stance with renewed focus. "Now I know what I'm dealing with. Let's see how that fancy throw works when I'm ready for it." Maya nodded approvingly, as if Morrison had just demonstrated excellent learning capacity. "That's exactly the right approach," she said. "Adaptation and tactical adjustment are essential survival skills." Again, her tone carried that quality of professional appreciation that made Morrison feel like he was being evaluated rather than fought. It was as if Maya were conducting some kind of assessment, and he was unknowingly participating in a test whose parameters he didn't understand. This time, Morrison approached more cautiously, using his reach advantage to probe for openings while maintaining better balance and body position. He'd seen enough military combatives to recognize that Maya had legitimate training, and he adjusted his strategy to account for an opponent who might actually know what she was doing. Maya met his more measured approach with what appeared to be genuine interest, circling with him and occasionally making small defensive movements that suggested she was taking his revised tactics seriously. But there was something almost educational in how she positioned herself, as if she were demonstrating proper defensive spacing and movement principles rather than simply trying to avoid being grabbed. Morrison feinted left and shot in low, aiming to wrap his arms around Maya's waist and use his weight advantage to drive her to the ground in a controlled manner. It was a textbook takedown attempt that should have been difficult to counter, especially for someone giving up significant size and strength advantages. Maya's response was to spin away from his grab while simultaneously threading her arm under his extended reach. Her movement was so fluid and precisely timed that Morrison found himself grabbing empty air while Maya stepped behind him and applied what felt like a gentle hand on his shoulder blade. The gentle touch sent Morrison stumbling forward with more momentum than he'd originally possessed. His own forward energy somehow amplified and redirected until he was rushing toward the edge of the mat much faster than he'd intended to go. He managed to stop himself just before stepping off the wrestling surface, but when he turned around, Maya was standing in the center of the mat, wearing an expression of polite inquiry. "Redirection of energy rather than opposition," she explained, as if Morrison had asked for technical analysis. "It requires less strength and creates fewer opportunities for counterattack." The crowd was beginning to murmur with uncertainty. What they were witnessing didn't match their expectations of how physical confrontations were supposed to develop. Morrison was clearly trying to engage seriously, but Maya seemed to be participating in a different activity entirely, something that looked like combat, but felt more like a physics demonstration. Casey Henderson stepped closer to the edge of the mat, his expression showing the kind of focused attention that suggested he was beginning to recognize something significant in Maya's movement patterns. "Jake," he called out, his voice lacking its earlier confidence, "maybe you should try a different approach. She's doing something I've never seen before." Maya glanced toward Henderson with what appeared to be approval. "That's very perceptive," she said. "Recognition of unfamiliar tactical approaches is an important combat skill." The comment was delivered with the same casual tone she'd been using all evening, but it contained an implication that made several people in the crowd exchange uncertain glances. Maya was talking about combat skills in the present tense, as if she were drawing on current expertise rather than remembering something she'd learned in a weekend self-defense class. Morrison decided to abandon subtlety entirely. If Maya wanted to play games with redirection and leverage, he'd overwhelm her technique with raw physical power. He charged forward again, this time with his arms spread wide to prevent her from slipping away, intending to wrap her up in a bear hug that would neutralize her mobility and allow him to use his weight advantage decisively. Maya's response was to step directly into his charge rather than away from it, moving inside his extended arms before he could close them around her. Her hands found pressure points on his ribs with surgical precision. And suddenly Morrison discovered that his intended bear hug had become something else. Entirely, something that left him vulnerable, in ways his mind was still processing. When Maya's hip made contact with his center of gravity, second throw was different from the first, more controlled, more deliberate, and somehow more educational. Maya guided Morrison through what felt like a carefully choreographed demonstration of physics principles, showing how leverage and timing could overcome raw strength when applied with sufficient knowledge and precision. Morrison found himself rotating through the air in a way that felt almost gentle despite its inevitability. And when he landed on the mat this time, it was with the growing certainty that he was completely outclassed by someone who had been holding back significantly. During their first exchange, as Morrison looked up at Maya from his second involuntary position on his back, he realized that nothing about this situation was what he'd originally assumed it to be. The quiet woman in the oversized hoodie hadn't wandered into the wrong building by accident. She wasn't a lost yoga instructor who needed to be taught a lesson about the difference between fantasy and reality. She was something else entirely. Something that made Morrison's combat-trained instinct scream warnings about threats he didn't yet understand. And judging by her expression of calm professional interest, they were only just getting started. Morrison pushed himself up from the mat with movements that carried none of his earlier confidence. His body was uninjured, but his understanding of the situation had been fundamentally altered by two throws that shouldn't have been possible. As he regained his footing, he found himself studying Maya with the analytical attention of someone trying to solve a tactical problem that defied his previous experience. The crowd's energy had shifted dramatically from predatory entertainment to confused uncertainty. What they were witnessing didn't fit into any category they understood. Maya wasn't fighting like an amateur who'd gotten lucky, nor was she displaying the aggressive dominance they expected from someone with legitimate combat training. Instead, she moved with an economy of motion and precision of technique that suggested capabilities far beyond anything they'd anticipated. Two lucky throws, Rico Martinez called out from the circle of spectators, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he could see that what had happened to Morrison wasn't random chance or beginner's luck. Maya's movements had been too deliberate, too perfectly timed, too technically sophisticated to be anything other than the application of advanced training. Maya turned toward Martinez with that same expression of polite interest she'd maintained throughout the evening. Luck is certainly a factor in any physical confrontation, she agreed conversationally. But consistent results usually indicate systematic application of established principles rather than random chance. The response was delivered in the tone of someone discussing weather patterns or traffic conditions, but it carried implications that made several people in the crowd exchange uneasy glances. Maya was essentially explaining that her success wasn't accidental while somehow making it sound like a casual observation rather than a threat or boast. Morrison decided to abandon his wrestling-based approach entirely. If Maya had some kind of specialized grappling training that allowed her to neutralize his size and strength advantages, he'd adapt by using his military combative's background to create a different type of engagement. Hand-to-hand combat was more chaotic than wrestling, and chaos typically favored the larger, stronger participant. "All right," Morrison announced to the crowd, his voice carrying renewed determination. "Let's expand the rules a little. This isn't just about wrestling anymore, it's about real-world capability." He settled into a combat stance that drew on his Marine training, his posture and hand positioning shifting to accommodate striking and defensive techniques rather than just grappling. Maya observed his tactical adjustment with what appeared to be genuine approval. "Adaptation to changing circumstances," she said, nodding as if Morrison had demonstrated excellent strategic thinking. That's exactly the right response when initial approaches prove ineffective. Again, her tone carried that quality of professional evaluation that made Morrison feel like he was participating in some kind of assessment rather than a fight. But he pushed the unsettling feeling aside and focused on the immediate tactical problem. Maya might know some throwing techniques, but hand-to-hand combat required a completely different skill set that took years to develop. Morrison launched a controlled combination, a left jab followed by a right cross. Both delivered with enough power to end the confrontation quickly if they connected, but with sufficient restraint to avoid causing permanent damage. His striking technique was solid, honed by years of military training and practical application in situations where precision and effectiveness had been matters of survival. Maya's response was to slip both punches with minimal movement, her head shifting just far enough to allow Morrison's fists to pass harmlessly through the space where her face had been moments before. Her evasive movements were so economical that she seemed to be expending almost no energy while forcing Morrison to punch empty air with full commitment. But what happened next was what truly caught the attention of everyone present. Instead of simply avoiding Morrison's strikes, Maya began to demonstrate defensive techniques with the clinical precision of an instructor conducting a training seminar. She showed how to deflect incoming punches using minimal contact, how to redirect attacking energy away from vital targets, and how to maintain perfect balance and positioning while under assault. Overextension on the cross, Maya commented as Morrison's second punch whistled past her ear. It creates recovery time that an opponent can exploit. As if to illustrate her point, she tapped Morrison's extended arm gently with her fingertips, causing his punch to continue past its intended target and leaving him momentarily off balance. Morrison threw a series of rapid combinations, increasing his tempo and aggression in an attempt to overwhelm Maya's defensive capabilities through sheer volume of attacks. His striking speed was impressive, each punch delivered with the kind of snap and power that came from extensive training and natural athletic ability. Maya responded by flowing around, his assault like water around stones, her defensive movements becoming almost dance-like in their fluid precision. She wasn't just avoiding Morrison's punches, she was demonstrating the fundamental principles of defensive combat while somehow making it look effortless. Every slip, every deflection, every subtle weight shift seemed designed to illustrate specific techniques rather than simply prevent damage. Rhythm breaking, Maya explained as she interrupted Morrison's combination with a perfectly timed step that forced him to adjust his striking pattern mid-sequence. Consistent tempo allows opponents to predict and counter offensive techniques. The crowd was beginning to realize that they weren't witnessing a fight in any traditional sense. Maya was conducting what appeared to be a private lesson in advanced combat techniques, using Morrison as an unwilling demonstration partner, while maintaining complete control over the pace and direction of the engagement. Henderson stepped closer to the edge of the mat, his expression showing the kind of focused attention that suggested recognition of something significant. "Jake," he called out, his voice carrying a note of warning. "She's not just defending. She's studying you." Maya glanced toward Henderson with genuine appreciation. "That's extremely perceptive," she said, maintaining her defensive flow while speaking conversationally. "Analysis of opponent patterns is essential for developing effective countermeasures." The acknowledgement sent a chill through Morrison that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. Maya was confirming that she'd been using his attacks as research data, gathering information about his capabilities and techniques while revealing nothing about her own offensive potential. Morrison decided to force the issue by attempting a takedown that combined striking with grappling. He threw a high punch to draw Maya's attention upward, then shot in low to grab her legs and drive her to the ground. It was a classic combination that required opponents to defend against multiple threats simultaneously. And it should have been difficult to counter, even for someone with legitimate training. Maya's response was to thread between his striking and grappling attempts with a fluidity that made Morrison's combination look clumsy by comparison. She deflected his punch while simultaneously sprawling to prevent the takedown. But her defensive movements flowed into what appeared to be the beginning of a counterattack, before stopping abruptly, for just a moment. Morrison found himself positioned exactly where Maya could have applied what looked like a chokehold or joint lock. His own momentum and positioning leaving him completely vulnerable to techniques he glimpsed, but didn't fully understand. Then Maya stepped back, allowing him to recover his balance without exploiting the opening she'd created. Combination attacks require precise timing between different elements, Maya observed, her tone carrying the same instructional quality she'd maintained throughout the engagement. Gaps between striking and grappling phases create opportunities for experienced defenders. Morrison realized with growing unease that Maya had just demonstrated she could have ended their confrontation at any point she chose. The opening she'd created, and then deliberately ignored, had been complete and overwhelming. The kind of tactical advantage that would have allowed her to apply submission holds or finishing techniques with impunity. But instead of capitalizing on her superior positioning, she'd used the moment to illustrate defensive principles while giving Morrison another opportunity to continue the engagement. It was as if she were conducting a seminar on combat techniques and wanted to ensure her demonstration partner remained functional for the full curriculum. The crowd had fallen into confused silence as they processed what they'd witnessed. What had started as entertainment at the expense of an apparently helpless victim had transformed into something that made them question their understanding of physical capability and tactical dominance. Maya wasn't just holding her own against Morrison, she was controlling every aspect of their interaction, while somehow making it look educational rather than threatening. Tommy Briggs found his voice first, though his earlier confidence had been replaced by uncertainty. "What the hell kind of training does she have?" he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Maya heard the question and smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Various types," she replied conversationally. "Continuous learning is important in any field that involves practical application under stress." The non-answer somehow managed to be both completely honest and utterly uninformative, leaving everyone with the growing certainty that they were dealing with someone whose background and capabilities were far more complex than anything they'd originally imagined. Morrison stood in the center of the mat, breathing heavily from his exertions while Maya remained as composed as if she'd been watching rather than participating. He was beginning to understand that everything that had happened so far had been entirely under her control, and that realization was more unsettling than any physical domination could have been. Whatever Maya was, whoever she really was, she was operating at a level that made Morrison's military training feel like amateur preparation for professional competition. Morrison stepped back from the engagement, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths as he tried to process what had just occurred. The demonstration of defensive capability he'd witnessed went beyond anything he'd encountered in his military service or subsequent civilian training. Maya wasn't just technically proficient, she was operating at a level that suggested access to instruction and experience that most people never encountered. "This is ridiculous," Tommy Briggs announced from the sidelines, his voice carrying the forced aggression of someone whose worldview was being challenged by evidence he didn't want to accept. "She's just running away from every attack. Let's see how those fancy moves work when she can't dance around like a ballerina." Maya turned toward Briggs with that same expression of polite interest she'd maintained throughout the evening. "You're absolutely correct that mobility is a significant factor in defensive success," she agreed pleasantly. "Limited space would certainly change the tactical parameters of any engagement. The acknowledgement should have been reassuring. But something in Maya's tone suggested she was stating a technical fact rather than expressing concern about a potential weakness. She seemed to be agreeing that restricted movement would create different challenges while implying that she had solutions available that didn't rely on evasive maneuvering. Rico Martinez pushed forward from the crowd, his earlier mockery replaced by the kind of focused attention that suggested genuine curiosity about what they were witnessing. "All right, let's test that theory," he said, gesturing toward the wrestling mat's boundaries. "Same rules, but this time you stay within a 6-foot circle. No more dancing around. Let's see what happens when you have to stand and fight." Maya considered the proposal with what appeared to be professional interest, as if Martinez had suggested an intriguing variation on a training exercise rather than proposed additional constraints designed to neutralize her advantages. "Restricted engagement parameters," she mused aloud. "That's an excellent way to test adaptability under modified conditions." Morrison found himself nodding despite his growing unease. If Maya's defensive success was based primarily on mobility and space management, then forcing her to operate within a confined area should level the playing field significantly. His size and strength advantages would become more relevant when she couldn't simply move around his attacks. 6-foot circle it is, Morrison agreed, using his foot to scratch a rough boundary into the mat surface. The improvised ring was barely large enough for 2 people to move comfortably. Forcing any engagement into close quarters where grappling and strength would be more important than evasive technique. Maya stepped into the restricted area with the same calm confidence she'd shown throughout the evening. Her positioning within the confined space was precise and economical, every movement calculated to maintain maximum tactical options despite the reduced maneuvering room. She settled into a stance that looked deceptively casual while somehow managing to convey complete readiness. "Interesting tactical challenge," Maya observed, testing her footing within the limited area. "Confined space combat requires different strategic approaches than open area engagements." Again, her comment carried that quality of professional analysis that made Morrison feel like he was participating in some kind of advanced training scenario rather than a simple physical confrontation. But the restricted space gave him renewed confidence. Whatever techniques Maya possessed, they would be less effective when she couldn't use superior positioning and movement to avoid direct engagement. Morrison approached more aggressively this time, using the confined space to cut off Maya's escape routes and force her to meet his attacks more directly. His first combination was delivered with controlled power, designed to test her defensive capabilities when evasive movement wasn't a viable option. Maya's response was to demonstrate that her defensive skills extended far beyond simple avoidance. Instead of trying to slip punches in the limited space, she began deflecting Morrison's attacks with precise hand movements that redirected his striking energy while simultaneously setting up counter opportunities. Her defensive technique was no longer about avoiding contact, it was about controlling and redirecting the contact that inevitably occurred in close quarters. But what truly caught everyone's attention was how Maya began to use the restricted space to her advantage rather than simply adapting to it as a limitation. She demonstrated footwork that seemed to multiply the effective area within the 6-foot circle, creating angles and positioning opportunities that shouldn't have been possible within such confined parameters. Spatial efficiency, Maya explained as she deflected one of Morrison's punches while simultaneously repositioning herself to a more advantageous angle. Close quarters combat requires maximum utilization of available maneuvering room. Morrison found himself more frustrated than ever. The restricted space that was supposed to neutralize Maya's advantages seemed to be revealing new dimensions of her capability. She wasn't just adapting to the confined area, she was demonstrating mastery of close quarters technique that made her previous defensive performance look elementary by comparison. Casey Henderson had been watching with growing recognition of something familiar in Maya's movement patterns. His own military background included specialized training in confined space operations, and what he was seeing triggered memories of instruction he'd received from personnel whose backgrounds had never been fully explained. "Jake, stop," Henderson called out, his voice carrying an urgency that cut through the crowd's fascination with the ongoing demonstration. "Look at how she's moving. That's not civilian training. That's not even standard military combatives." Maya glanced toward Henderson with what appeared to be approval mixed with mild surprise. "That's very perceptive," she said, maintaining her defensive flow while speaking conversationally. "Recognition of specialized technique indicators is an important tactical skill." The acknowledgement sent a chill through Morrison that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Maya was confirming Henderson's observation, while somehow managing to sound both complimentary and slightly impressed. As if Henderson had identified something that most people wouldn't notice. Morrison decided to abandon all restraint and use his full capability to overwhelm whatever training Maya possessed. The confined space meant she couldn't avoid a determined assault, and his military experience included techniques designed to end confrontations quickly and decisively. If Maya wanted to test advanced capabilities, he'd show her what professional training looked like when applied without limitation. What followed was the most intense exchange of the entire engagement. Morrison attacked with everything he'd learned in military service and years of subsequent training, combining striking, grappling, and tactical pressure in ways designed to force immediate submission or unconsciousness. His assault was technically sophisticated and physically overwhelming, the kind of attack that should have been impossible to defend against. Regardless of the defender's skill level, Maya's response was to demonstrate defensive capabilities that transcended anything the crowd had witnessed previously. She didn't just deflect or redirect Morrison's attacks, she began to systematically dismantle his offensive capability while somehow making it look like a carefully choreographed demonstration of advanced technique. Every punch Morrison threw was intercepted and neutralized with minimal apparent effort. Every grappling attempt was countered before it could develop into a threatening position. Every tactical pressure he applied was absorbed and redirected in ways that left him more vulnerable than when he'd started the attack. But most unsettling was how Maya began to demonstrate offensive capabilities for the first time. As she defended against Morrison's assault, she showed glimpses of striking and grappling techniques that suggested access to training that went far beyond anything available to civilians or standard military personnel. The techniques were delivered with surgical precision and stopped just short of causing actual damage, as if she were demonstrating capability without fully implementing it. "Joint manipulation," Maya explained, as she briefly applied what looked like the beginning of an arm lock before releasing it. "Pressure point activation," she continued, tapping Morrison's ribs in a way that made his entire left side go momentarily numb. "Respiratory disruption," she concluded, applying gentle pressure to Morrison's throat that made him realize how completely his breathing was under her control. Each technique was demonstrated just long enough for Morrison to understand what was happening before being withdrawn, leaving him with the growing certainty that Maya could have ended their engagement at any point she chose. But instead of finishing him, she seemed to be using his attacks as opportunities to display an increasingly sophisticated curriculum of combat techniques. The crowd had fallen into stunned silence as they processed what they were witnessing. What had started as entertainment, at the expense of an apparently helpless victim, had transformed into a demonstration of capability that challenged their understanding of what human beings could accomplish through training and practice. Morrison found himself trapped in the center of the 6-foot circle, breathing heavily while Maya remained as composed as if she'd been conducting a lecture rather than defending. against a sustained assault from someone who outweighed her by 70 pounds and possessed extensive military training. "That's impossible," Rico Martinez whispered, voicing what everyone was thinking but afraid to say aloud. Maya heard the comment and smiled with genuine warmth. "Impossible is often just another word for unfamiliar," she replied conversationally. "Most capabilities seem extraordinary until you understand the principles and training methods that make them achievable." The response was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing gardening techniques, but it carried implications that made everyone present realize they were dealing with someone whose background and training were far more complex than anything they'd originally imagined. Morrison stood in the center of the confined space, finally understanding that everything that had happened had been completely under Maya's control from the moment she'd stepped onto the mat. He wasn't just outclassed, he was participating in something that felt more like an assessment than a competition. The atmosphere in Iron Fortress had transformed completely. What had begun as Friday night entertainment had evolved into something that challenged everyone's understanding of human capability and combat effectiveness. The casual conversations and workout routines that typically filled the warehouse space had ceased entirely, replaced by focused attention on the demonstration taking place at the center of the wrestling mat. Detective Sarah Walsh pushed through the gym's entrance doors just as Morrison was stepping back from his latest failed assault attempt. Her timing was coincidental. She'd come to Iron Fortress looking for Casey Henderson regarding an ongoing investigation, but what she observed upon entering made her forget entirely about her original purpose for being there. Walsh had spent 15 years in law enforcement, including 5 years with the department's tactical unit before being promoted to detective. Her experience included extensive training in threat assessment and combat capability evaluation, skills that were essential when dealing with suspects who might pose serious physical danger to officers or civilians. What she was witnessing challenged her professional understanding of what civilian-level training could accomplish. "Henderson," Walsh called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention in chaotic situations. "I need to speak with you about the Rodriguez case." Henderson turned toward the familiar voice, but his response was delayed as he struggled to process both Walsh's unexpected appearance and the ongoing demonstration he'd been watching with growing unease. "Detective Walsh," he managed finally, "this isn't really a good time. We're in the middle of something here." Walsh followed Henderson's gaze toward the wrestling mat, where Morrison stood breathing heavily while Maya remained in that same state of calm readiness she'd maintained throughout the entire engagement. The contrast between the two participants was striking. Morrison looked like someone who'd been through a sustained physical ordeal, while Maya appeared as fresh as if she'd been watching from the sidelines. "What exactly am I looking at?" Walsh asked, her trained eye automatically cataloging details that might be relevant to threat assessment. Maya's positioning, her state of alertness, the way she maintained perfect balance while appearing completely relaxed, these were indicators that suggested professional level training rather than amateur capability. That woman just spent the last 20 minutes systematically dismantling Jake Morrison, Henderson replied, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and concern. "And she's been making it look like a training demonstration rather than a fight." Walsh studied Maya more carefully, her law enforcement experience triggering recognition of something familiar in the woman's bearing and movement patterns. There was a quality to Maya's alertness that suggested military or law enforcement background, but executed with a level of sophistication that went beyond standard training. "Ma'am," Walsh addressed Maya directly, her voice carrying the professional courtesy she used when dealing with unknown individuals who might represent either assets or threats. "I'm Detective Walsh, Riverside Police Department." Could I ask what's happening here? Maya turned toward Walsh with the same expression of polite interest she'd shown everyone else throughout the evening. But those with law enforcement experience might have noticed that her positioning shifted subtly to maintain visual contact with all potential threats while keeping her back to solid cover. "Good evening, Detective," Maya replied, her voice carrying genuine respect for Walsh's professional status. "We've been conducting an informal demonstration of defensive combat techniques. Nothing that violates any local ordinances or safety regulations." The response was technically accurate, but somehow managed to be completely uninformative about the true nature of what had occurred. Walsh recognized the careful phrasing of someone who understood legal language and knew how to provide answers that satisfied official inquiry without revealing sensitive information. "Demonstration," Walsh repeated, studying the scene more carefully. Morrison's appearance suggested he'd been through something significantly more challenging than a casual training session, while Maya looked like she could continue for hours without fatigue. "What type of training background do you have that qualifies you to conduct combat demonstrations?" Maya's pause was barely perceptible, but Walsh caught it. The hesitation suggested consideration of how much information to reveal rather than uncertainty about the answer itself. "Various types of instruction over the years," Maya replied eventually. "Self-defense, fitness, stress management. Nothing that requires special certification for demonstration purposes." Again, the answer was truthful but evasive in a way that triggered Walsh's professional instincts. People with legitimate training backgrounds were usually eager to discuss their credentials, especially when questioned by law enforcement. Maya's reluctance to provide specific information suggested either false modesty or deliberate concealment. Tommy Briggs, emboldened by the presence of law enforcement, decided to escalate the situation. "Detective, this woman has been assaulting people here tonight. She attacked Jake without provocation and has been using some kind of illegal fighting techniques." Walsh turned her attention to Briggs, immediately recognizing the type of individual who tried to manipulate law enforcement for personal advantage. "Is that your assessment of what happened here?" she asked, her tone carrying the kind of professional skepticism she used when dealing with unreliable witnesses. "It's exactly what happened," Briggs insisted. "That woman is dangerous. She's been using military-style combat techniques against civilians. Someone could get seriously hurt." Maya listened to Briggs' characterization with what appeared to be mild amusement rather than concern. Her lack of defensive reaction to serious accusations was itself significant. Most people became agitated when accused of assault. But Maya seemed to find the allegations more entertaining than threatening. "Mr. Morrison," Walsh addressed the man directly, "do you want to file a complaint about being assaulted?" Morrison looked between Maya and the detective, his military training warring with his ego about how to respond to the question. Admitting he'd been dominated by someone half his size would be professionally and personally humiliating. But falsely claiming assault against someone who'd clearly been defending herself would be legally problematic. "No complaint," Morrison said finally, his voice carrying grudging respect despite his obvious frustration. "It was a fair engagement. I initiated the contact, and she responded appropriately." Walsh nodded, recognizing the honesty in Morrison's admission despite his clear reluctance to acknowledge being outperformed. Her attention returned to Maya, who had observed the entire exchange with that same calm interest she'd shown throughout the evening. "Ma'am, could I see some identification?" Walsh requested, using her professional authority to gather information that might clarify Maya's background and potential threat level. Maya reached slowly into her back pocket, her movements deliberate and visible to ensure that Walsh understood she wasn't reaching for a weapon. The identification she produced was a standard California driver's license that appeared legitimate and current. Walsh examined the license carefully, noting the name, address, and physical description that matched the woman standing before her. But something about the documentation triggered her professional paranoia. It was too perfect, too clean, lacking the minor irregularities and wear patterns that characterized genuine identification carried by real people. Maya Chun, Walsh read aloud. Riverside resident for 3 years. Occupation listed as fitness instructor. Maya nodded confirmation. But Walsh noticed that her expression remained carefully neutral, rather than showing the slight relief most people displayed when their documentation was accepted without challenge. And what type of fitness instruction do you provide? Walsh continued, probing for information that might explain Maya's demonstrated capabilities. Various disciplines, Maya replied with the same evasive precision she'd used in previous responses. Yoga, self-defense, stress management, flexibility training. Mostly private sessions rather than group classes. Walsh recognized a pattern of answers that provided minimal information while remaining technically truthful. Maya was clearly experienced in dealing with official inquiries, without revealing sensitive details about her background or activities. Rico Martinez, frustrated by what he perceived as Maya's evasion of accountability, decided to provide additional context. Detective, you should see what she did to Morrison. It wasn't normal self-defense. It was like watching someone with military special operations training toy with an amateur. Walsh turned her attention back to Maya, who had listened to Martinez's description without any visible reaction. Most people accused of possessing specialized military training would either confirm it proudly or deny it defensively. But Maya seemed to find the observation merely interesting rather than significant. Is that an accurate assessment? Walsh asked directly. Do you have military or law enforcement training? Maya's hesitation was longer this time, suggesting careful consideration of how to respond to a direct question from law enforcement about potentially sensitive background information. When she finally answered, her voice carried a quality that suggested both honesty and deliberate limitation. I've had various types of instruction over the years, she said carefully. Some of it might appear similar to military or law enforcement training to observers unfamiliar with civilian self-defense programs. The response was masterfully evasive while remaining technically truthful. Maya was neither confirming nor denying military background, instead suggesting that appearances might be misleading while avoiding any specific claims about her training or experience. Walsh studied Maya's face, looking for the subtle tells that indicated deception or concealment. What she saw was someone who was clearly experienced in handling official questioning, without revealing information they preferred to keep private, but who wasn't displaying the nervous tension typical of people with something genuinely illegal to hide. The detective's radio crackled with a priority call from dispatch, interrupting her investigation of the situation at Iron Fortress. As she listened to details about an armed robbery in progress across town, Walsh realized she needed to respond immediately to the more urgent situation. This conversation isn't finished, Walsh told Maya, her voice carrying the promise of future scrutiny. I'll be back to follow up on tonight's events, and I recommend you be available for additional questions. Maya nodded politely, as if Walsh had suggested a future social meeting rather than threatened continued investigation. Of course, Detective. I'm usually available most evenings. As Walsh hurried toward the exit to respond to her priority call, she couldn't shake the feeling that she just encountered someone whose background and capabilities were far more complex than anything revealed by a fitness instructor's identification and evasive answers about civilian self-defense training. Behind her, Maya remained at the center of the wrestling mat, surrounded by men who were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about physical capability and combat effectiveness had just been fundamentally challenged by someone who looked like she belonged in a yoga studio rather than a warehouse, where violence was a form of entertainment. Detective Walsh's departure left an uncomfortable vacuum in the warehouse atmosphere. Her professional presence had provided a brief illusion of official oversight and control. But now the assembled crowd found themselves once again confronting the reality that Maya represented something beyond their understanding or ability to categorize. The questions that Walsh had asked but not answered hung in the air. Like smoke from an extinguished fire, Casey Henderson approached the wrestling mat with the careful movements of someone who had finally recognized the true nature of what they were dealing with. His own military background included exposure to personnel whose capabilities and backgrounds operated at classification levels that required special clearances. And Maya's responses to official questioning had triggered memories of individuals whose very existence was compartmentalized information. "Ma'am," Henderson said, his voice carrying none of the casual aggression that had characterized the evening's earlier interactions. "I think we need to have a different kind of conversation now." Maya turned toward Henderson with that same expression of polite interest, but something in her posture suggested increased attention. Henderson's tone and approach were different from the crude challenges and mockery she'd encountered previously, carrying instead the careful respect of someone who suspected they were dealing with a professional colleague rather than a civilian outsider. "What did you have in mind?" Maya asked, her voice maintaining its conversational quality, while somehow conveying readiness for a more serious discussion. Henderson gestured toward a quieter area of the warehouse, away from the crowd of spectators who were still processing what they'd witnessed. "Somewhere we can talk without an audience. Some things are better discussed privately." Maya considered the suggestion for a moment, her eyes quickly scanning the proposed location to assess sight lines, exit routes, and potential tactical advantages or disadvantages. The evaluation was subtle but thorough, conducted with the automatic efficiency of someone for whom environmental assessment was an ingrained habit. "That seems reasonable," Maya agreed, following Henderson toward a section of the warehouse where weight equipment created natural barriers to both sound and observation. Morrison watched them move away from the central area, his own military experience telling him that Henderson had recognized something significant about Maya's background. The careful way both individuals positioned themselves during their movement suggested professional awareness of tactical considerations that went beyond civilian concerns about personal space and social comfort. Tommy Briggs, frustrated by his inability to control the evening's narrative, called out after them with forced bravado, "Whatever classified nonsense you think you're dealing with, this is still just some woman who got lucky against. Jake, don't let her mind games fool you into thinking she's something special." Maya paused at the edge of the equipment area, turning back toward Briggs with an expression that had shifted subtly from polite interest to something more analytical. For the first time since entering Iron Fortress, her facade of civilian normalcy seemed to crack slightly, revealing hints of something harder and more professional underneath. "Mr. Briggs," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a quality that made everyone present stop talking and pay attention. "Sometimes the most dangerous assumption you can make is that competence and capability are always obvious from external appearance." The statement was delivered with calm certainty rather than threat or boast, but it carried implications that made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Maya was essentially explaining that their initial assessments had been fundamentally flawed while somehow making it sound like educational guidance rather than criticism. Henderson led Maya to a position near the heavy bag area where their conversation could proceed without constant observation from the crowd. His positioning was careful and professional, close enough for private discussion but far enough from potential cover or concealment to maintain clear sightlines and tactical awareness. 23 years military, Henderson began, establishing his own credentials as a foundation for the conversation. Multiple deployments, specialized training, exposure to personnel and operations at various classification levels. He paused, Studying Maya's reaction to his disclosure of relevant background, Maya nodded acknowledgement but didn't reciprocate with information about her own service record. Her silence was respectful but clearly indicated that she would listen to what Henderson had to say without necessarily providing equivalent disclosure about her own background. What I witnessed tonight, Henderson continued carefully, suggests training and experience that goes beyond anything available through civilian programs or standard military instruction. The techniques you demonstrated, the way you controlled every aspect of multiple engagements while maintaining complete situational awareness, that level of capability typically indicates exposure to specialized programs. Maya listened without interruption, her expression revealing neither confirmation nor denial of Henderson's assessment. She seemed to be evaluating not just his words, but his motivations for making these observations and the implications of how she chose to respond. There are programs, Henderson said, lowering his voice slightly, that operate at classification levels where personnel records are compartmentalized and access is strictly controlled. People who complete that type of training often transition to civilian life with backgrounds that can't be discussed openly, even years after their service ends. Maya's posture remained relaxed, but Henderson noticed that her positioning had shifted slightly to maintain visual contact with both him and the broader warehouse area. The adjustment was subtle but suggested ongoing tactical awareness even during apparently casual conversation. "That's an interesting perspective," Maya replied eventually, her voice carrying acknowledgement of Henderson's expertise without confirming or denying the accuracy of his assessment. Some types of experience are difficult to discuss in civilian contexts. The response was carefully neutral but carried implications that Henderson recognized from his own encounters with personnel whose backgrounds involved sensitive operations. Maya was neither confirming nor denying classified training, but she was acknowledging that such training existed and that discussion of it was often restricted. Meanwhile, Morrison had been conducting his own analysis of the evening's events. His military experience included enough exposure to special operations personnel to recognize capabilities that exceeded standard training, and Maya's demonstration had displayed levels of skill that suggested access to instruction typically reserved for the most elite units. Rico Martinez approached Morrison with obvious frustration about the direction the evening had taken. "Jake, this whole thing has gotten out of hand. We came here for a workout, not to deal with some mysterious woman who may or may not have classified military training." Morrison nodded but continued watching Henderson and Maya's distant conversation. "The problem is that what she demonstrated wasn't ambiguous, Rico. Those techniques were real. And the level of control she maintained throughout multiple engagements suggests training that goes way beyond civilian self-defense programs." "So what are you saying? That she's some kind of secret agent or special forces operator hiding in plain sight?" Martinez's voice carried skepticism tinged with unease. "I'm saying that people with certain types of backgrounds often transition to civilian life without being able to discuss their service records openly," Morrison replied. "And if that's the case here, then everything about tonight makes a lot more sense." Back in the equipment area, Henderson was attempting to gather more specific information about Maya's background without directly asking questions that might violate operational security protocols. His approach was careful and professional, designed to confirm suspicions without forcing disclosure of classified information. "The precision of your defensive technique," Henderson said, "and the way you demonstrated offensive capabilities while maintaining complete control over their application. That suggests training in environments where precision and restraint are equally important." Maya considered the observation carefully before responding. "Some situations require the ability to demonstrate capability without necessarily implementing it fully," she agreed. "The difference between showing that you can do something and actually doing it is often significant in terms of both outcomes and consequences. Henderson recognized the careful phrasing of someone who understood the difference between displaying threatening capability and actually employing it. Maya was acknowledging that her demonstration had been deliberately limited, while implying that her full capabilities remained unrevealed. "Ma'am," Henderson said finally, "I want you to know that if your background includes service that can't be discussed openly, that information would be respected here. Some of us understand that certain types of service require ongoing discretion, even years after completion." Maya met his gaze directly for the first time during their conversation, her expression showing what appeared to be genuine appreciation for his understanding of the complexities involved in transitioning from classified operations to civilian life. "That's very thoughtful," Maya replied, her voice carrying warmth that had been absent during her interactions with the rest of the crowd. Professional respect and understanding are rare in civilian environments. The acknowledgement was as close to confirmation as Henderson was likely to receive, but it was sufficient to answer the questions that had been building throughout the evening. Maya was someone with advanced training and experience that couldn't be discussed openly, and her presence at Iron Fortress had been coincidental rather than part of any ongoing operation. But even as Henderson reached that conclusion, he realized that Maya's true background and current activities remained largely mysterious, and that the evening's demonstration might have been only a glimpse of capabilities that extended far beyond what any of them had witnessed. Henderson's conversation with Maya was interrupted by the arrival of 3 individuals who entered Iron Fortress with the kind of purposeful movement that immediately drew attention from everyone present. Unlike the gym's typical clientele, these newcomers moved with coordinated precision that suggested professional training and specific objectives. Rather than casual workout intentions, the lead figure was a woman in her early 40s with short-cropped blonde hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. Her companions flanked her with positioning that maintained clear sight lines and tactical awareness of the warehouse environment. All 3 were civilian clothes, but their coordination and alertness marked them as something other than random gym visitors. Maya noticed them immediately, her posture shifting in ways that Henderson recognized from his own military experience. The change was subtle but significant. Maya's casual demeanor was replaced by heightened awareness and readiness that suggested the newcomers represented either backup or opposition rather than coincidental arrivals. "Maya, Chun," the lead woman called out, her voice carrying across the warehouse with practiced authority. "We need to talk." The use of Maya's name rather than a general greeting confirmed that this wasn't a chance encounter. The newcomers had come to Iron Fortress specifically to find Maya, which raised immediate questions about how they'd known her location and what their purpose might be. Maya's response was to step away from Henderson slightly, creating space for maneuvering while maintaining visual contact with all parties present. Her movement pattern suggested automatic threat assessment and tactical positioning rather than simple social adjustment. "Agent Parker," Maya replied, her tone carrying recognition mixed with wariness. "I wasn't expecting company tonight." The exchange revealed that Maya and the lead woman had previous contact, but the formal use of titles suggested professional rather than personal relationships. Henderson noted that Maya had addressed the woman as agent, which implied law enforcement or intelligence connections that added new dimensions to the evenings. Mysteries. Agent Parker approached the equipment area where Maya and Henderson had been talking, her companions maintaining overwatch positions that provided coverage of potential exit routes and threat vectors. Their deployment was professional and efficient, suggesting extensive training in tactical coordination and urban operations. "Mr. Henderson," Parker said, acknowledging his presence with the kind of courtesy reserved for civilians. who weren't directly relevant to ongoing operations. "We appreciate your discretion, but this conversation needs to be private." Henderson recognized the polite but firm dismissal of someone with authority to enforce their requests. His military background had exposed him to similar situations where civilian personnel were excluded from discussions involving classified information or sensitive operations. "Of course," Henderson replied, understanding that his continued presence might complicate whatever official business Parker represented. He turned to Maya with genuine concern. "Ma'am, if you need anything, I'll be available." Maya nodded appreciation for Henderson's offer while maintaining focus on Parker and her companions. The interaction revealed mutual respect between Maya and Henderson, despite the brief nature of their acquaintance, suggesting that their earlier conversation had established some level of trust and understanding. As Henderson moved away to rejoin the crowd of spectators, Parker stepped closer to Maya with the careful movements of someone who understood they were dealing with a potentially dangerous individual. Her approach was respectful but alert, maintaining tactical distance while indicating readiness for serious discussion. "Maya, your presence here tonight triggered several monitoring systems," Parker explained, her voice low enough to prevent casual eavesdropping. "When local law enforcement ran queries on your identification, it created automatic notifications that reached some very interested parties." Maya's expression didn't change, but her positioning adjusted slightly to account for Parker's companions, while maintaining awareness of the broader warehouse environment. The revelation that her identification was being monitored suggested ongoing official interest in her activities and movements. "I've been careful to maintain a low profile," Maya replied, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone discussing sensitive operational matters. "Tonight's events were circumstantial rather than planned." Parker nodded understanding but continued with obvious concern. "The problem is that your demonstration tonight was witnessed by multiple individuals, including a police detective who filed a preliminary report about encountering someone with advanced combat capabilities using civilian identification." The implication was clear. Maya's decision to reveal her skills, even in limited demonstration, had attracted official attention that could complicate whatever arrangement allowed her to operate under civilian identity. The careful balance she'd maintained between hiding and living normally had been disturbed by the evening's events. From across the warehouse, Morrison watched the interaction between Maya and the federal agents with growing unease. The arrival of official personnel to collect Maya confirmed his suspicions about her background while raising new questions about what type of operations or activities she might be involved in currently. Tommy Briggs approached Morrison with obvious agitation about the evening's developments. "Jake, this whole situation is getting way too complicated. First the police, now federal agents. I think we should all just forget tonight happened and get back to normal routines." Morrison understood Briggs' concern, but found himself increasingly curious about Maya's true story and the circumstances that had brought someone with her capabilities to operate under civilian cover in their community. The evening had revealed layers of complexity that challenged his understanding of how classified operations and personnel transition to post-service life. "The problem is that it's too late to pretend. Tonight didn't happen," Morrison replied. "Too many people witnessed what she could do, and now official agencies are involved. Whatever story she's been maintaining just got a lot more complicated." Back in the equipment area, Parker was providing Maya with information about the broader implications of the evening's events. Her tone carried the urgency of someone delivering potentially critical updates about threats or opportunities that required immediate attention. 3. Separate agencies have been tracking residual indicators of Operation Nightfall personnel, Parker explained, using terminology that clearly carried classified significance. Your demonstration tonight created signature patterns that matched profiles they've been monitoring. Maya's reaction was immediate and controlled, a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested Parker had just confirmed her worst fears about maintaining operational security while living under civilian cover. How much exposure are we talking about? Maya asked, her voice carrying the professional concern of someone calculating risks and response options. Enough that your current arrangement may no longer be viable, Parker replied grimly. There are people who have been very interested in confirming that certain personnel from Nightfall actually survived their official termination. And tonight's events may have provided that confirmation. The conversation was clearly referring to classified operations and personnel decisions that had resulted in Maya's transition to civilian life under circumstances that required ongoing secrecy. The revelation that her survival was still being investigated by hostile parties added urgency to whatever decisions needed to be made about her immediate future. Rico Martinez had been watching the distant conversation between Maya and the federal agents with growing anxiety about the potential consequences for everyone who had witnessed the evening's events. His civilian background provided no framework for understanding how classified operations impacted ordinary people who accidentally became involved. Morrison, what happens to us now? Martinez asked quietly. If that woman is some kind of classified operative, and we've all seen what she can do, are we going to have problems with federal agencies? Morrison considered the question carefully, drawing on his military experience to assess the likely official response to civilian exposure to classified personnel or operations. His conclusion wasn't particularly reassuring for anyone involved. That depends on what type of classification we're dealing with and how sensitive Maya's background actually is, Morrison replied. Best case scenario, we get visited by people who ask us to sign non-disclosure agreements and forget everything. Worst case scenario, we become ongoing security concerns that require permanent monitoring. The possibility that the evening's entertainment had transformed them into potential security risks added another layer of complexity to a situation that had already exceeded everyone's ability to process normally. What had started as casual mockery of an apparently helpless victim had evolved into exposure to classified operations and personnel that could have lasting implications for everyone present. Parker's conversation with Maya was reaching conclusions that would determine not just Maya's immediate future, but potentially the fate of everyone who had witnessed her capabilities and learned about her background. The decisions made in the next few minutes would either contain the evening's revelations or escalate them into something that could reshape multiple lives in ways none of them had anticipated. When they'd arrived for what they thought would be a routine Friday night at the gym, Parker's expression grew more serious as she prepared to deliver information that would fundamentally change everyone's understanding of who Maya really was. She glanced around the warehouse to ensure their conversation remained private, then pulled out a secure tablet that displayed classified files, marked with clearance levels that most government employees never encountered. Maya, the time for partial disclosure has passed, Parker said, her voice carrying the weight of decisions made at the highest levels of government. Operation Nightfall's classification has been modified to allow limited revelation under specific circumstances. Tonight's events qualify as those circumstances. Maya's carefully maintained civilian facade finally cracked completely, revealing the hardened professional underneath. Her posture straightened into military bearing. Her eyes took on the calculating focus of someone accustomed to processing classified briefings, and her voice lost all traces of the polite uncertainty she'd used throughout the evening. What's the new operational status? Maya asked, her tone shifting to the clipped precision of someone requesting critical Intelligence updates. Under time pressure, Parker activated the secure tablet, displaying personnel files that had been sealed at the highest classification levels for over 5 years. The screen showed photographs and service records for individuals whose very existence was officially denied by every government agency. Lieutenant Commander Maya Chun, United States Navy SEAL Team Echo, Parker announced, her voice carrying the formal authority of someone reading official documentation. Also known as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Morrison, depending on operational requirements. Also known by classified designation, Phantom 7. The revelation hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Maya wasn't just a former military member with advanced training. She was a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite special operations personnel in the world. But even more shocking was the implication that she'd been operating under multiple identities for classified purposes. That went beyond standard military service. Morrison felt his legs go weak as the full magnitude of his earlier mockery became clear. He'd called a Navy SEAL a yoga instructor and challenged her to demonstrate her capabilities against his amateur military training. The humiliation was complete. I've been careful to maintain a low profile, Maya replied, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone discussing sensitive operational matters. Tonight's events were circumstantial rather than planned. Parker nodded understanding but continued with obvious concern. The problem is that your demonstration tonight was witnessed by multiple individuals, including a police detective who filed a preliminary report about encountering someone with advanced combat capabilities using civilian identification. The implication was clear. Maya's decision to reveal her skills, even in limited demonstration, had attracted official attention that could complicate whatever arrangement allowed her to operate under civilian identity. The careful balance she'd maintained between hiding and living normally had been disturbed by the evening's events. From across the warehouse, Morrison watched the interaction between Maya and the federal agents with growing unease. The arrival of official personnel to collect Maya confirmed his suspicions about her background while raising new questions about what type of operations or activities she might be involved in currently. Tommy Briggs approached Morrison with obvious agitation about the evening's developments. Jake, this whole situation is getting way too complicated. First the police, now federal agents. I think we should all just forget tonight happened and get back to normal routines. Morrison understood Briggs' concern, but found himself increasingly curious about Maya's true story and the circumstances that had brought someone with her capabilities to operate under civilian cover in their community. The evening had revealed layers of complexity that challenged his understanding of. Tommy Briggs found his voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. 127 confirmed kills. She's killed 127 people in combat operations. Maya turned toward Briggs with an expression that had completely transformed from the polite, civilian demeanor she'd maintained throughout the evening. Her eyes carried the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen more combat than most people could comprehend. And her voice held the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under impossible pressure. Mr. Briggs, Maya said quietly, each one of those eliminations was authorized under rules of engagement designed to protect American personnel and interests. Each one was a tactical decision made in circumstances where failure to act would have resulted in mission failure and loss of American lives. The explanation was delivered without emotion or justification. Simply a statement of fact from someone who had spent years in situations where violence was a necessary tool for protecting broader strategic objectives. Maya wasn't apologizing for her service record. She was explaining the context that made such actions necessary and authorized. Rico Martinez stepped backward instinctively, his civilian mind struggling to process the reality that he'd been sharing space with someone whose job had involved killing people with professional precision. "You're a professional killer," he said, his voice carrying horror and fascination in equal measure. "I'm a professional protector," Maya corrected firmly. "Every action I took during my service was designed to protect American personnel, prevent larger conflicts, or neutralize threats that pose significant danger to civilian populations. The fact that this sometimes required lethal force doesn't change the ultimate purpose of those actions," Parker continued, revealing classified information that painted a picture of Maya's service that went far beyond conventional special operations. Lieutenant Commander Chun was assigned to Echo Team after demonstrating exceptional capability in precision elimination, close-quarters combat, and solo operations in hostile territory. Her psychological profile indicated unusual ability to function independently under extreme stress while maintaining operational effectiveness. Morrison found himself staring at Maya with a mixture of awe and horror as he processed the full implications of what he'd challenged earlier in the evening. He'd attempted to physically dominate someone whose training and experience included eliminating 127 enemy combatants, often under circumstances where she was outnumbered and operating without support. "The techniques she demonstrated tonight," Morrison said slowly, "those were just basic defensive maneuvers for someone with her background." "Correct," Parker confirmed. Lieutenant Commander Chun was deliberately limiting her response to avoid seriously injuring civilian personnel. Her actual combat capabilities include lethal techniques that would be inappropriate for demonstration in civilian environments. Casey Henderson approached the group with obvious respect for Maya's newly revealed status, his own military experience providing context for understanding the significance of her service record. "Ma'am," he said formally, "I want to apologize for any disrespect shown earlier. We had no idea who we were dealing with." Maya studied Henderson with appreciation for his understanding of military courtesy and protocol. "Mr. Henderson, no apology is necessary. My operational security required maintaining civilian cover, which meant accepting civilian treatment. Your later recognition of professional indicators showed excellent tactical awareness. The acknowledgement carried the weight of professional respect from someone whose opinion was worth more than most people could fully comprehend." Maya was recognizing Henderson's military competence, while absolving him of any responsibility for the evening's earlier mockery and challenges. But even as the immediate social dynamics were being resolved, Parker's presence indicated that Maya's exposure created new problems that would require immediate attention and potentially dramatic life changes for everyone involved. "The question now," Parker said, addressing both Maya and the assembled crowd, "is how to manage this exposure in a way that protects ongoing operations while ensuring the security of everyone present." The statement carried implications that made everyone realize their Friday evening entertainment had evolved into a situation with national security ramifications that could affect their lives for years to come. Maya's identity revelation wasn't just about satisfying curiosity. It was the beginning of a process that would determine whether they became assets, liabilities, or ongoing security concerns for classified operations that officially didn't exist. Maya looked around at the faces of people who had spent the evening underestimating and challenging her. Seeing them now struggle to reconcile her appearance with the reality of her background and capabilities, the transformation in their expressions from mockery to respect to fear was complete. But it represented only the beginning of consequences that would reshape everything about her carefully constructed civilian life. "Agent Parker," Maya said finally, "what are my operational orders?" Parker's expression shifted to convey the gravity of the situation as she prepared to deliver operational instructions that would determine not just Maya's immediate future, but the fate of everyone who had witnessed the evening's revelations. The secure tablet in her hands displayed mission parameters that had been authorized at the highest levels of government, involving decisions that could reshape multiple lives within the next few hours. "Lieutenant Commander Chun," Parker said, using Maya's military rank to emphasize the formal nature of what followed. "We have a developing situation that requires immediate deployment of your specific skill set. A high-value target extraction mission has been authorized, and your capabilities are uniquely suited to the operational requirements." Maya's transformation from civilian fitness instructor to elite special operations personnel was now complete. Her posture straightened into perfect military bearing. Her voice took on the clipped precision of someone receiving classified briefings, and her eyes focused with the intensity of someone processing life-or-death mission parameters. "Mission briefing," Maya requested, her tone carrying the professional authority of someone accustomed to leading operations that most people couldn't imagine. Parker activated additional files on the secure tablet, revealing satellite imagery and tactical intelligence that painted a picture of complexity and danger that went far beyond routine law enforcement operations. 12 hours ago, Senator Rebecca Martinez was taken hostage during what appeared to be a routine diplomatic meeting in an undisclosed location. Intelligence indicates she's being held by a group with advanced military training and equipment. The assembled crowd listened to the briefing with growing understanding that they were witnessing the activation of classified operations that normally occurred far from civilian observation. Maya's presence at Iron Fortress had been coincidental, but her exposure had created the opportunity for immediate deployment without the usual coordination delays. "Hostage location?" Maya asked, her voice carrying the clinical focus of someone analyzing tactical problems rather than emotional concerns about danger or complexity. "Industrial facility approximately 40 miles southeast of here," Parker replied, displaying detailed architectural plans and security assessments. "The structure provides excellent defensive positions and multiple potential escape routes. Conventional assault would result in hostage execution before breach teams could reach the target location." Morrison found himself following the tactical discussion with fascination and growing respect for the level of operational complexity that Maya regularly dealt with during her classified service. The mission parameters being described would challenge the capabilities of entire special operations units, but Parker was discussing them as assignments for a single operator. "Opposition force assessment?" Maya continued, working through the standard intelligence requirements that would determine mission planning and equipment selection. Parker scrolled through additional files that revealed surveillance data and threat analysis conducted by intelligence agencies with resources that civilian law enforcement couldn't match. Minimum 12 hostiles with professional military training, possibly former special operations personnel from various allied nations. Equipment includes military-grade weapons, communications gear, and explosive devices. Henderson listened to the briefing with his own military experience, providing context for understanding just how dangerous the proposed mission would be. 12 trained opponents with professional equipment and defensive positioning would represent overwhelming odds for most special operations teams, let alone a single operator working without support. "Timeline constraints?" Maya asked, continuing her systematic evaluation of mission parameters. "Senator Martinez will be executed in 8 hours if ransom demands aren't met," Parker replied grimly. "Political considerations prevent meeting their financial requirements, and conventional rescue operations would take longer to organize than our available window allows." Tommy Briggs found himself struggling to process the transformation of the evening, from casual entertainment to witnessing the deployment of classified special operations. "This is insane," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're talking about one person, attempting to rescue a United States senator from 12 professional killers. Parker turned toward Briggs with the patient expression of someone explaining complex realities to civilians unfamiliar with special operations capabilities. Mr. Briggs, Lieutenant Commander Chen has successfully completed 34 similar missions during her active service. Her tactical success rate in hostage extraction operations is 100%. The statistic silenced any further objections from Briggs while providing context for understanding why Maya was being deployed as a single operator, rather than waiting for conventional rescue resources. Her track record indicated capabilities that exceeded those of larger teams operating under less stringent time constraints. Equipment requirements? Maya asked, returning focus to operational planning details. Parker gestured toward her companions, who had been quietly coordinating logistical support throughout the briefing. Full tactical loadout is being prepared at a forward staging area. Weapons, communications, specialized equipment, and extraction resources will be available within 30 minutes of deployment. Authorization. Maya nodded acceptance while conducting final mental calculations about mission feasibility and resource requirements. Her analysis was rapid but thorough, drawing on years of experience in evaluating impossible odds and determining optimal approaches to seemingly insurmountable tactical problems. Extraction contingencies? Maya continued, working through scenarios that might develop if the primary mission plan encountered unexpected complications. Multiple options depending on mission outcomes, Parker replied, displaying contingency plans that accounted for various success and failure scenarios. Primary extraction by helicopter at predetermined coordinates. Secondary ground evacuation routes if air assets become unavailable. Emergency protocols if immediate extraction becomes impossible. Morrison watched Maya process the briefing materials with growing appreciation for the hoodie level of tactical sophistication required for the types of operations she routinely conducted during her classified service. The mission being described would require capabilities that went far beyond anything he'd encountered during his own military experience. Casey Henderson approached the briefing area with obvious respect for the operational gravity of what was being planned. "Ma'am," he addressed Maya formally, "is there anything civilian personnel can do to support mission success?" Maya considered Henderson's offer with appreciation for his understanding of how support networks functioned in special operations environments. "Mr. Henderson, the most valuable support would be maintaining operational security about tonight's events and my deployment. Information leaks could compromise mission success and endanger both the hostage and extraction personnel." The request emphasized that everyone present had become part of a classified operation simply by witnessing Maya's identity, revelation, and mission briefing. Their discretion wasn't just requested, it was essential for preventing hostile intelligence services from anticipating the rescue attempt. Parker concluded the briefing by addressing the broader implications for everyone who had witnessed the evening's events. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've been exposed to classified information and operations that officially don't exist. Your cooperation and discretion are essential for protecting ongoing national security operations." Maya looked around at the faces of people who had spent the evening underestimating her capabilities. Seeing them now understand that they were witnessing the deployment of one of America's most elite special operations personnel on a mission that could determine the fate of a United States senator and potentially influence broader political outcomes. "Agent Parker," Maya said finally, her voice carrying the controlled tension of someone preparing for immediate deployment into extreme danger, "I'm ready for mission execution." The forward staging area was located in an abandoned industrial complex 15 miles from Iron Fortress. chosen for its isolation and tactical advantages that provided secure preparation space, without risking civilian exposure or hostile surveillance. Maya arrived at the facility 37 minutes after receiving her deployment orders. Her civilian clothes replaced by tactical gear that transformed her from fitness instructor back into one of America's most lethal special operations personnel. Equipment layout reflected years of refinement in special operations logistics. Weapons were arranged with surgical precision, each piece selected for specific mission requirements rather than general capability. Communications gear provided encrypted channels that bypass standard military networks, ensuring operational security that protected both the mission and related classified activities. Specialized tools included items that most people wouldn't recognize but that represented cutting-edge technology designed for scenarios where conventional equipment would prove inadequate. Maya conducted her equipment inspection with mechanical efficiency, checking each component with the thoroughness of someone whose survival depended on perfect gear functionality. Her hands moved across weapons and tools with muscle memory, developed through thousands of hours of preparation for missions where equipment failure meant death for both operator and hostages. Primary weapon system configured for precision engagement at extended range, reported technical specialist Linda Torres, whose role involved ensuring that Maya's equipment matched mission requirements exactly. Secondary systems include close quarters options and specialized entry tools. Maya tested the weapon's balance and sight alignment with movements that demonstrated complete familiarity with every aspect of the system's operation. Her weapon handling was fluid and unconscious, the kind of proficiency that came from using identical equipment under live-fire conditions where hesitation or unfamiliarity could prove fatal. Communications check, Maya requested, activating the encrypted radio system that would provide her only connection to support personnel during the mission. Parker's voice came through clearly from the command center that had been established in an adjacent building. Overwatch operational. Satellite surveillance confirms target facility status unchanged. Hostile personnel maintaining defensive positions consistent with earlier intelligence assessments. The real-time intelligence updates provided Maya with current information about enemy positioning and activities, allowing her to adjust her approach based on developments that had occurred since the initial mission briefing. The intelligence network supporting her operation represented resources that most government agencies couldn't access, emphasizing the critical nature of Senator Martinez's situation. Maya studied detailed architectural plans of the target facility while conducting final mission planning calculations. The building's layout provided multiple potential entry points, but each one presented tactical challenges that would require different approaches and contingency planning. Her analysis was rapid but comprehensive, drawing on experience with similar facilities during her classified service. Primary approach vector through the Eastern Maintenance Corridor, Maya announced, tracing her planned route through the facility's layout. Secondary option via rooftop access if ground-level entry becomes compromised. Tertiary extraction through underground. Utility systems if conventional exit routes are blocked. The multiple contingency plans reflected the complexity of operations where Murphy's Law was considered a fundamental tactical principle. Maya's planning accounted for scenarios where everything that could go wrong would go wrong, ensuring that mission success remained possible even under catastrophic conditions. Torres provided final equipment updates that completed Maya's preparation for immediate deployment. Explosive charges configured for multiple breach requirements. Medical kit includes trauma supplies for hostage treatment. Emergency beacon provides extraction coordination if primary communications fail. Maya secured the specialized equipment with practiced efficiency, distributing weight and access priorities based on anticipated mission requirements. Her load configuration reflected years of experience in determining what equipment would be essential, useful, or merely convenient during operations where every ounce carried could determine mission success or failure. Transportation to target area ready for departure, announced Agent Parker from the command center. Helicopter insertion will place you approximately 2 miles from the facility to avoid detection by hostile surveillance systems. The insertion distance represented a compromise between operational security and mission timeline constraints. Maya would need to cover the final approach on foot to avoid alerting the hostage-takers to her presence. But the extended infiltration route would consume valuable time from her already constrained operational window. Maya conducted final personal preparation rituals that helped her transition from planning mode to operational readiness. Her breathing became deeper and more controlled. Her movements settled into the economical efficiency that characterized elite operators under extreme stress. And her mental focus narrowed to encompass only mission-critical information and objectives. "Overwatch, this is Phantom 7, Maya announced into her radio, using her classified operational call sign for the first time in 5 years. Ready for deployment. The call sign carried weight that transcended simple identification. Phantom 7 had been responsible for some of the most successful special operations missions in recent military history, and her reactivation for this operation indicated both the critical nature of Senator Martinez's situation and the confidence that command personnel had in Maya's capabilities. Parker's voice responded with the formal authority of someone authorizing operations at the highest classification levels. "Phantom 7, you are cleared for immediate deployment. Mission timeline begins now. Primary objective is safe extraction of Senator Martinez. Secondary objective is elimination of hostile personnel threatening mission. Success." Maya moved toward the waiting helicopter with the focused intensity of someone whose training and experience had prepared her for exactly this type of impossible mission. Her stride carried the confidence of someone who had successfully completed 34 similar operations, but also the controlled tension of someone who understood that every mission presented unique challenges that could prove fatal despite perfect preparation. The helicopter's rotors were already spinning as Maya approached, creating downdraft that whipped dust and debris across the staging area. The aircraft was configured for special operations insertion, equipped with systems that allowed nearly silent approach and rapid extraction under hostile fire if necessary. As Maya settled into the aircraft and began final equipment checks, she allowed herself one brief moment to consider the path that had brought her from tonight's civilian demonstration at Iron Fortress to reactivation for a mission that could determine the fate of a United States Senator. The transition felt both natural and surreal, as if her 5 years of civilian life had been merely an intermission between acts of a larger drama. The helicopter lifted off precisely on schedule, carrying Maya toward a facility where 12 professional killers were holding Senator Martinez under circumstances that conventional rescue operations couldn't address. The flight would take 18 minutes, giving Maya final preparation time before beginning an operation that would test every skill she developed during her classified service. Through her headset, Maya heard Parker providing final intelligence updates that reflected real-time surveillance of the target facility. Phantom 7, hostile personnel count confirmed at 12 individuals. Defensive positioning unchanged since last update. Hostage confirmed alive and conscious in the central holding area. Maya acknowledged the information while conducting final mental rehearsal of her planned approach sequence. The mission would require perfect timing and execution, with no margin for error or hesitation. Senator Martinez's life depended on capabilities that had made Phantom 7 legendary within special operations communities, but which had never been tested under the specific constraints of tonight's operational parameters. As the helicopter approached the insertion point, Maya completed her transformation from Maya Chun, civilian fitness instructor, to Phantom 7, one of America's most elite special operations personnel deployed on a mission that officially didn't exist to save a hostage whose capture threatened national security interests that extended far beyond a single political figure. The real test of everything she'd demonstrated at Iron Fortress was about to begin under conditions where failure meant death for both herself and the person she'd been sent to save. The insertion went flawlessly, Maya's boots touching ground in a wooded area exactly 2 miles from the target facility at 0147 hours. The helicopter departed immediately, its specialized rotor configuration allowing near-silent withdrawal that left no auditory signature for hostile surveillance to detect. Maya was alone in darkness that felt familiar rather than threatening, surrounded by the kind of operational environment where she had spent years proving that impossible missions were simply challenges requiring proper application of training and experience. Maya moved through the terrain with the fluid efficiency of someone whose survival had depended on invisible approach techniques in hostile territory. Her navigation was precise despite the absence of artificial lighting, guided by landmark recognition and internal compass skills that allowed accurate movement without electronic assistance that could compromise operational security through signal detection. Target facility appeared ahead of schedule, its industrial silhouette visible against ambient light pollution from distant urban areas. Maya's initial surveillance confirmed intelligence assessments about defensive positioning and structural advantages that made conventional assault impractical. But her trained eye also identified vulnerabilities that satellite reconnaissance couldn't detect, weaknesses in the facility's defensive perimeter that could be exploited by someone with appropriate skills and equipment. Maya established her primary observation position in a location that provided visual coverage of all facility approaches while maintaining concealment from hostile surveillance. Her equipment deployment was methodical and silent, each component positioned for immediate access during the complex sequence of actions that would comprise her assault plan. Overwatch. Phantom 7 in position, Maya whispered into her communication system, confirming hostile personnel deployment consistent with intelligence estimates. Beginning detailed reconnaissance. Parker's voice responded immediately from the command center where real-time satellite feeds provided additional operational support. Copy, Phantom 7. Updated timeline shows 4 hours 23 minutes remaining before hostile deadline. Proceed when ready. Maya spent the next 47 minutes conducting surveillance that revealed patrol patterns, communication procedures, and defensive weaknesses that would determine her approach sequence. The hostile personnel were indeed professional in their training and equipment, but their positioning reflected conventional military thinking that could be countered by someone with specialized infiltration experience. At 0234 hours, Maya began her infiltration through the eastern maintenance corridor she had identified during mission planning. The facility's security systems had been disabled by the hostage-takers to prevent law enforcement tracking, but this also eliminated barriers that would have complicated Maya's approach through utility access points. Her movement through the facility's interior was ghost-like, each step calculated to avoid detection while maintaining rapid progress toward the hostage location. Maya's infiltration skills had been refined through dozens of operations in environments where discovery meant immediate combat against overwhelming odds. And tonight's mission represented familiar territory. Despite its unique tactical challenges, Maya reached the central area where Senator Martinez was being held ahead of her projected timeline. positioning herself to observe both the hostage and her captors without revealing her presence. What she saw confirmed that rescue would require eliminating all 12 hostile personnel simultaneously. As any survivor could execute the senator before, Maya could prevent it. The complexity of the elimination sequence required precision that pushed human capability to its absolute limits. Maya would need to engage multiple targets in different locations within seconds of each other, using techniques that ensured immediate incapacitation without creating noise or movement that could alert other hostiles to the ongoing assault. Maya's approach combined her demonstrated close-quarters combat skills with specialized equipment designed for silent elimination of multiple targets. Her movement through the facility became a deadly ballet, each engagement calculated to eliminate threats while maintaining tactical surprise for subsequent targets. The first 3 eliminations occurred within a 6-second window. Hostile personnel neutralized with techniques that prevented any vocal or physical response that could compromise operational security. Maya moved through the facility like a lethal shadow, her presence becoming apparent to each target only in the final instant before elimination. By 0312 hours, Maya had reduced hostile personnel count to 3 individuals who remained in direct proximity to Senator Martinez. These final eliminations would require simultaneous action to prevent hostage execution, demanding timing and precision that represented the ultimate test of Maya's specialized capabilities. Maya positioned herself for final assault with visibility of all remaining targets and clear sight lines for engagement sequence. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that preceded action phases of the most challenging missions she had conducted during her classified service. The final elimination sequence lasted 4 seconds. Maya engaged the first target with close-quarters technique, while simultaneously positioning for engagement of the second hostile. Her transition between targets was fluid and immediate, weapons switching between configurations optimized for different engagement ranges and tactical requirements. Senator Martinez witnessed the conclusion of Maya's assault with expressions of shock and relief that confirmed her understanding of having been rescued by someone with extraordinary capabilities. The senator's condition appeared stable despite obvious stress from her captivity experience. Overwatch Phantom 7. Maya reported into her communication system while conducting rapid assessment of Senator Martinez's physical condition. Primary objective secured. All hostile personnel neutralized. Proceeding to extraction point. Parker's response carried obvious relief mixed with professional satisfaction about mission success. Outstanding work, Phantom 7. Extraction helicopter inbound to primary coordinates. Medical team standing by for hostage evaluation. Maya guided Senator Martinez through the facility toward the predetermined extraction point, maintaining tactical alertness for potential complications that could develop during withdrawal phases of operations. Her protective positioning ensured that any residual threats would encounter Maya before reaching the senator. The extraction helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, its crew executing pickup procedures with efficiency that reflected extensive experience in similar operations. Senator Martinez was secured aboard the aircraft and provided immediate medical evaluation while Maya conducted final equipment accountability procedures. As the helicopter lifted off from the target area, Maya allowed herself the first moment of relaxation since receiving her deployment orders 8 hours earlier. The mission had been successful by every measure, demonstrating that her 5 years of civilian life hadn't diminished the capabilities that had made Phantom 7 legendary within special operations communities. Senator Martinez, after receiving initial medical clearance, approached Maya with obvious gratitude and professional respect. "I don't know who you are or how you accomplished what just happened, but I want you to know that your actions tonight preserved more than just my life. The legislative initiatives I've been working on will protect thousands of military families. Maya nodded acknowledgement while maintaining the operational security protocols that governed discussion of classified activities. Senator, ensuring your safety was a privilege. Your service to military personnel and their families makes tonight's mission personally meaningful. The helicopter flight provided Maya time to process the evening's complete transformation. From civilian fitness demonstration to successful completion of one of the most challenging hostage rescue missions in recent special operations history. The transition felt both natural and remarkable, confirming that some capabilities transcended formal service status. Upon return to the forward staging area, Maya was greeted by Agent Parker and support personnel who had coordinated tonight's operation. Their expressions reflected professional satisfaction, mixed with genuine admiration for mission execution that had exceeded even their optimistic projections. Phantom 7, Parker said formally. Mission success has been confirmed at the highest levels. Your reactivation for tonight's operation demonstrated capabilities that justify continued availability for future requirements. Maya understood the implication that her civilian life might include periodic reactivation for missions requiring her specific skill set, but the prospect felt appropriate rather than burdensome. Some capabilities carried ongoing responsibilities that transcended personal preference or convenience. As Maya prepared to return to the civilian life that would resume tomorrow morning, she reflected on the evening's lessons about assumptions, capabilities, and the importance of recognizing competence regardless of its packaging. The men at Iron Fortress had learned that expertise often appeared in unexpected forms, while Maya had rediscovered that some identities were too fundamental to abandon completely. The quiet fitness instructor would continue her civilian life in Riverside, but Phantom 7 remained ready for missions that officially didn't exist, protecting people who would never know her name while serving causes that made such anonymity worthwhile. In the distance, morning light was beginning to touch the horizon, marking the end of a night that had proven legends were real and that sometimes the most dangerous person in any room was the one nobody expected. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.